What would you do if your parents sold your house while you were saving their company from bankruptcy? Most people would never imagine their own family could betray them this deeply. But 73% of family betrayals involve financial manipulation, and I learned this statistic the hard way. My name is Brandon Martinez, and what started as a 2 a.m. phone call from my mother would end with me walking into our family business as the new owner, watching their faces turn white as I said those 4 words, "Clean out your desks." By the end of this story, you'll see how one moment of betrayal became the catalyst for the most strategic comeback of my life. For 18 months, I'd been living in Singapore, working 16-hour days in the suffocating humidity, all to save Martinez Construction, the family business my father built from nothing 30 years ago. The company was hemorrhaging money, drowning in debt, and facing bankruptcy, while my college friends were climbing corporate ladders and building their own lives. I was sacrificing everything. My relationship with Sarah, my social life, even my dream of starting my own architectural firm. The sacrifice wasn't just emotional, it was financial. I'd purchased my house in Phoenix specifically to use as collateral for the company's emergency loan. It was a modest 3-bedroom home in a decent neighborhood, nothing fancy, but it represented everything I'd worked for since graduating college. The down payment came from 5 years of saving every penny, and I'd spent weekends renovating it myself, dreaming of the day Sarah and I might start a family there. My parents had moved into the house temporarily while I was overseas, supposedly to maintain the property and manage the business operations. Every week, we'd have video calls where Dad would update me on contracts, and Mom would show me how well she was taking care of my garden. They seemed grateful, almost emotional about my sacrifice. "Brandon, you're saving 3 generations of work," Dad would say, his voice heavy with pride. "We'll never forget what you're doing for this family." But those calls started getting shorter. Dad's updates became vague. "Things are picking up," or "we're handling it." Mom stopped showing me the garden. When I asked specific questions about the numbers, they'd deflect. "Don't worry about the details, son. Focus on your work there." I should have seen the warning signs, but I trusted them with everything I owned. After all, they were my parents. The call came at 2 a.m. Singapore time on a Tuesday in November. I was still at the office, reviewing blueprints for a high-rise project, when my phone buzzed. Mom's face appeared on FaceTime, but something was different. She wasn't in my house. The background looked like a restaurant or bar. There was laughter in the background, and her face had this strange, almost giddy expression. "Brandon, guess what?" she said, her voice unnaturally cheerful. "We sold your house. It's done." Then she laughed, this high, nervous laugh that made my blood run cold. "The market was too good to pass up. We got enough to pay off the company debt and have some left over." The words hit me like a physical blow. My hands started shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone. "What do you mean you sold my house?" My voice came out strangled, barely above a whisper. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she continued, waving her hand dismissively. "You're never coming back anyway, right? You love it there in Singapore, and this way, the company is completely debt-free. Your father's so relieved." The details spilled out in fragments. They'd used the power of attorney I'd given them, meant only for emergency business decisions, to sell my home. The buyer was some LLC I'd never heard of. They'd sold it for $280,000, nearly 40% below market value, calling it a quick sale to help the family. The money went straight into the company accounts. "But that house was my collateral," I managed to say. It wasn't supposed to be sold unless the company was actually failing. "Well, we decided to be proactive," Mom said, her tone becoming defensive. "Besides, you can buy another house later when you settle down somewhere." This was the smart business move. The most devastating part wasn't just the financial loss. It was the casual way she delivered the news, like she was telling me about a dinner party. There was no acknowledgement of what that house meant to me. No recognition that they'd just destroyed 5 years of my life without even asking. They'd made a $250,000 decision about my property, like they were choosing what to have for lunch. I stared at the screen, watching my mother's face in the dim light of whatever establishment she was calling from, and something shifted inside me. The trust I'd had my entire life, the belief that family meant protection and loyalty, it all crumbled in that moment. But instead of exploding, instead of screaming or crying, I felt myself go perfectly calm. "I understand," I said quietly. "Thanks for letting me know." "That's it?" Mom looked surprised, maybe even disappointed by my lack of reaction. "I thought you'd be more upset." "I'm processing it," I replied. "We'll talk later." After I hung up, I sat in that Singapore office for 3 hours, staring at the city lights and feeling something cold and calculating settle into my chest. They thought they were so clever, solving their problems at my expense. They had no idea what they'd just started. The next morning, I began making calls. Not to my parents, I wouldn't speak to them again for 2 months. Instead, I contacted my lawyer in Phoenix, my banker, and a forensic accountant I'd met through business connections. If they wanted to play financial games with my life, I needed to understand exactly what game they were playing. What I discovered over the next 2 weeks made their betrayal even worse. The company wasn't just surviving, it was actually profitable. They'd landed 3 major contracts while I was in Singapore, worth over $2.3 million combined. The emergency that justified selling my house didn't exist. They'd sold it because they wanted to, because it was convenient, because they could. The house had been sold to Desert Holdings LLC, which traced back to my father's golf buddy, Pete Hoffman. Pete had been circling our family's financial troubles like a vulture, and my parents had essentially given him a $120,000 gift by selling below market value. The quick sale story was complete fiction, but the most infuriating discovery was a text thread my cousin Maria forwarded to me. My parents had been bragging to the extended family about their smart financial move, talking about how they'd taught Brandon a lesson about real business and how I was too young to understand property management. They were actually proud of what they'd done. That's when I stopped feeling hurt and started feeling strategic. From my Singapore office, I began researching Martinez Construction with the cold efficiency of a corporate raider. I analyzed their client base, their contracts, their suppliers, their debt structure. I studied the local construction market, identifying opportunities and weaknesses. What I found was a company with incredible potential that was being completely mismanaged. My parents were old-school contractors who kept everything on paper, had no digital presence, and were losing bids to more tech-savvy competitors. They had loyal workers but no systems, good relationships but no growth strategy. More importantly, I discovered they were heavily leveraged. The company owed money to 6 different creditors. suppliers, equipment lenders, and a line of credit from a regional bank. The total debt was manageable for a profitable company, but it created vulnerability. All those debts could be purchased by someone with enough capital and the right legal strategy. I'd spent 18 months in Singapore, not just working, but learning. The construction firm I worked for specialized in international acquisitions, and I'd watched them execute 3 hostile takeovers of smaller companies. I'd learned about debt purchasing, asset valuation, and the legal mechanics of corporate acquisition. My parents thought they'd sent me away to make them money, but they'd actually sent me to business school. Over the next month, working with a team of lawyers and financial advisors, I began quietly purchasing Martinez Construction's debt. It wasn't difficult. Most creditors were happy to sell to someone offering immediate payment at 90 cents on the dollar. Within 6 weeks, I owned 80% of the company's outstanding obligations. The beauty of the strategy was its simplicity. I could demand immediate payment of all debts, forcing the company into bankruptcy, then acquire the assets at auction. Or my parents could sell the company to me directly to avoid the bankruptcy. Either way, I would own Martinez Construction, but I wanted more than ownership. I wanted the perfect moment. I spent 2 weeks coordinating with HR consultants, security companies, and legal advisors to plan the confrontation down to the minute. I had termination letters drafted, final paychecks calculated, and even arranged for a security escort. This wouldn't be an emotional family fight. It would be a professional business transaction. The timeline was crucial. I scheduled my return to Phoenix for a Monday morning, exactly 2 months after the phone call where my mother laughed about selling my house. I'd purchased a business suit in Singapore, practiced my entrance, and prepared for every possible reaction they might have. On Sunday night, I flew from Singapore to Phoenix, carrying nothing but a briefcase and a burning desire to see their faces when they realized what they'd done. They thought they were so smart, manipulating their son to save their failing business. They had no idea their son had just become their new boss. The next morning, I would walk into Martinez Construction as the sole owner, and my parents would learn the most expensive lesson of their lives. Never betray someone who's smarter than you think they are. Monday morning arrived with that crisp Phoenix winter air that I'd missed during my humid months in Singapore. I sat in my rental car outside Martinez Construction at 7:45 a.m., watching my parents' routine unfold exactly as I remembered. Dad's beaten-up Ford truck pulled into his usual spot, followed by Mom's sedan 5 minutes later. They moved with the casual confidence of people who believed they controlled their world. What they didn't notice were the subtle changes around them. Over the weekend, my team had installed new signage. Martinez International Construction, under new management. The old faded letters had been replaced with sleek, professional lettering that gleamed in the morning sun. Security cameras had been positioned at key angles. Inside, HR consultant Patricia Williams waited with a folder of documents, while my attorney, David Chen, sat in what used to be the conference room. I watched Dad unlock the front door, heard Mom's laughter echoing across the parking lot as she told him some story about their weekend. They had no idea that 18 months of strategic planning was about to crash down on them like a demolished building. At exactly 8 a.m., I stepped out of the car. The business suit I'd purchased in Singapore felt like armor, navy blue, perfectly tailored. nothing like the casual contractor clothes I used to wear around the office. I carried a leather briefcase that contained termination letters, ownership documents, and security protocols. Every detail had been rehearsed. The moment I walked through the front door, I could hear their voices from Dad's office. Mom was saying something about finally having some breathing room, and Dad was laughing about teaching Brandon about real business. The casual cruelty in their voices, discussing my financial destruction like it was a successful weekend project, made my resolve crystallize into something harder than concrete. I knocked on Dad's office doorframe. "Good morning." The conversation stopped instantly. Dad looked up from his coffee, and I watched confusion flicker across his face as he took in my appearance, the suit, the briefcase, the formal posture. Mom turned in her chair, her smile freezing as she processed what she was seeing. "Brandon?" Dad's voice carried uncertainty. "What are you doing here? I thought you weren't coming back until Christmas." "Plans changed," I said, stepping into the office. "We need to talk." Mom recovered first, her face shifting into that patronizing expression I now recognized as manipulation. "Honey, you look so serious. Is everything okay? Did something happen with your job?" "You could say that." I set my briefcase on Dad's desk with a deliberate click. "As of this morning, I'm unemployed, but I have a new position starting today." Dad frowned. "What kind of position?" "Brandon, if you're thinking about working here, we need to discuss." "I'm not thinking about working here, Dad." I opened the briefcase and pulled out a folder. "I'm thinking about owning here." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the air conditioning cycling on. Mom's face went through a series of micro-expressions: confusion, disbelief, then dawning horror as I placed the ownership documents on the desk. "I don't understand," she whispered. "It's actually quite simple." I kept my voice level, professional. "Over the past 6 weeks, I purchased 80% of Martinez Construction's outstanding debt from your creditors. All of it, the equipment loans, the supplier credit, the bank line of credit, everything." Dad's face had drained of color. He picked up the documents with shaking hands, scanning the legal language that confirmed his worst nightmare. "This is impossible. You can't just... How did you?" "The same way you sold my house," I replied. "Legal documentation and strategic timing. The difference is I actually own what I'm selling." Mom stood up so quickly, her chair rolled backward. "You can't do this. This is our company. Your father built this from nothing." "And you used my house as collateral to save it," I said. "Then you sold my house for parts when you didn't need to, so now I own the company. It's really that simple." I pulled out another set of documents. "You have 2 choices. You can sell Martinez Construction to me directly for fair market value, which my appraisers estimate at $1.2 million, or I can demand immediate payment on all debts, force you into bankruptcy, and acquire the assets at auction for significantly less." Dad was staring at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. "Brandon, this is insane. We're your parents. This is a family business." "Exactly," I said. It was a family business until you decided to treat me like a creditor instead of a son." I closed the briefcase. "You have until 5 p.m. today to decide. My lawyers will be in the conference room if you want to discuss terms." "This is blackmail," Mom hissed, her voice rising to that shrill pitch she used when she wasn't getting her way. "No, Mom, blackmail is threatening to reveal embarrassing secrets. This is business." I straightened my tie. The same kind of business decision you made when you sold my house without asking. The transformation in their faces was remarkable. The casual confidence had evaporated, replaced by something I'd never seen in my parents before. Genuine fear. They were finally understanding that their son wasn't the naive kid they could manipulate anymore. At 11:30 a.m., Dad knocked on the conference room door. His shoulders were slumped, and he looked like he'd aged 5 years in 3 hours. "We'll sell," he said quietly, "but we want to stay as employees. This is still our life's work." I looked at him for a long moment, remembering 18 months of 16-hour days in Singapore humidity, remembering the casual laugh in Mom's voice when she told me she'd sold my house. "I'm afraid that's not going to work out." "What do you mean?" I stood up and walked to the window overlooking the shop floor, where 3 longtime employees were working on a residential project. Good men who'd been loyal to our family for years. "I mean, your employment with Martinez International Construction is terminated, effective immediately." The words hung in the air like dust after a demolition. Dad made a choking sound. "Brandon, you can't be serious. Where are we supposed to go? What are we supposed to do?" "I don't know, Dad. What was I supposed to do when you sold my house?" I turned back to face him. "Maybe you can ask Pete Hoffman for a job. I hear he got quite a deal on some property recently." Mom appeared in the doorway, her face red and blotchy from crying. "You're destroying us. We're your parents." "You destroyed yourselves the moment you decided to steal from me." I picked up 2 envelopes from the conference table. "These are your termination letters and final paychecks. You have 30 minutes to clear out your personal belongings. Security will escort you out." "Security?" Dad's voice cracked. "You're having us escorted out by security?" "It's standard procedure for terminated employees," I said. "Especially ones who've proven they can't be trusted with company assets." The next 25 minutes were the longest of my life. I watched from the conference room window as my parents moved through the office like ghosts, collecting personal items under the watchful eye of the security guard. Mom kept crying, making these awful hiccuping sounds. Dad moved mechanically, like he was sleepwalking. Some part of me, the part that remembered Dad teaching me to use power tools, Mom bringing me lunch when I worked late, wanted to stop this. But then I remembered that laugh, that casual dismissal of my sacrifice, and I held firm. At exactly noon, they walked out of Martinez Construction for the last time as employees. They didn't look back. By 2 p.m., I'd called an all-hands meeting with the remaining staff, 8 men who'd worked for my family for years, looking uncertain and worried about their futures. I stood at the front of the shop in my Singapore suit, looking at faces I'd known since childhood. "I know this is confusing," I began, "and I know some of you might be wondering about your jobs. Let me be clear. If you want to stay, you have a place here. In fact, you're about to see some changes that I think you'll appreciate." I outlined the new benefit package I'd designed. Health insurance for all employees and their families. A retirement plan with company matching, paid sick leave, and performance bonuses tied to project completion. Benefits their previous employers, my parents, had never provided. "The company is going international," I continued. "I have contacts in Singapore, Hong Kong, and Dubai. We're going to bid on projects you never imagined working on. But we're also going to maintain our commitment to this community." Miguel Rodriguez, who'd worked for Dad for 15 years, raised his hand. "What about your parents? This seems personal," I finished. "It is personal. They sold my house while I was overseas saving this company. They betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way possible. But my feelings toward them don't change my commitment to all of you." Over the following weeks, the transformation was remarkable. We implemented digital project management systems, updated our equipment, and began pursuing contracts that my parents never would have considered. The company that had been slowly dying under their old-school management started thriving under professional leadership. The first major contract came through my Singapore connections, a $3.2 million mixed-use development that required international coordination. Within 2 months, we'd hired 6 additional employees. By the 4th month, we'd opened a second location. My parents tried various approaches to reconcile. Dad showed up at the office twice, asking to just talk. Mom sent cards, called my cell phone, even reached out through relatives. But every time I was tempted to soften, I remembered that laugh, that casual dismissal of my sacrifice. The legal proceedings took 6 months. They sued for wrongful termination, claiming I'd stolen their company. The judge reviewed the debt acquisition, the house sale, and the power of attorney abuse. Their case was dismissed with prejudice, and they were ordered to pay court costs. More painful for them than the legal defeat was the social cost. The construction community in Phoenix is surprisingly small, and word spread quickly about what they'd done. Other contractors stopped returning Dad's calls. Mom was asked to leave her book club when the story came out. They'd thought they were so clever, manipulating their son, but they'd actually destroyed their own reputation. Meanwhile, Martinez International Construction became the success story they'd always dreamed of. We won awards for workplace safety and employee satisfaction. Industry magazines featured articles about our innovative use of international partnerships. The company they'd founded grew into something they never could have imagined. A year after that Monday morning confrontation, I was reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant brought me an envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter from my father. "Brandon," it read, "I know we can't undo what we did. I know we betrayed your trust in the worst possible way. I've had a year to think about it, and I realize we were wrong. Not just about the house, but about everything. We treated you like an asset instead of our son. You deserved better. The company you've built proves what we always knew but never said. You're smarter and better than we ever were. I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry. Love, Dad." I read the letter 3 times, then filed it in my desk drawer. Forgiveness might come someday, but trust was a foundation that, once destroyed, couldn't simply be rebuilt with good intentions. 2 years later, Martinez International Construction employs 43 people across 3 locations. We've completed projects in 5 states and have partnerships on 2 continents. The house my parents sold for $280,000 is now worth $420,000, money that went to building something much more valuable than property. I learned that family isn't just about blood, it's about loyalty, trust, and mutual respect. The men and women who work for Martinez International now are my chosen family, people who earn their place through competence and character rather than genetics. Sometimes I drive past the house they sold, the one I renovated with my own hands and lost through their betrayal. The new owners have painted it yellow and added a garden that's more elaborate than anything I ever planned. It looks happy, lived in, loved. I don't feel anger anymore when I see it. Instead, I feel grateful. That house was the price of learning who my parents really were and what I was really capable of. They thought they were stealing my foundation, but they were actually forcing me to build something stronger. The company is now worth more than $8 million. Every success, every new contract, every employee whose family has better health care because of the benefits we provide. It all traces back to that moment when my mother laughed and said, "We sold your house, it's done." She was right about one thing: it was done. Their control over my life, my willingness to sacrifice everything for people who saw me as an asset rather than a son, my naive belief that family meant automatic loyalty, all of it was done. What began was something far more valuable, a life built on merit rather than manipulation, success earned rather than inherited, and relationships based on mutual respect rather than genetic obligation. They sold my house, but I bought my freedom, and that turned out to be the best deal of my life.